DK Marley, the Hist Fic Chickie, and I'd like to welcome you to the podcast today. Thank you so much to all of my listeners for being patient, as so many changes have happened over the past few weeks. Well, I mean a month, as the new website has launched. I'd love for you to go over and check out www.thehistoricalfictioncompany.com and look for our podcast page. This is the new landing page for the podcast, the RSS feed from Podbean, but we also have links there to Spotify and iHeartRadio for you to listen to the interviews. I will talk more later on this in the episode about the new website, but I'm anxious to talk to our guest today. We're welcoming Juliane Weber to the podcast today, where we will get to know her and her book, Under the Emerald Sky. Juliane is actually a scientist. She holds degrees in physiology and zoology, including a PhD in physiology. During her studies, she realized, however, that her passion lay not in conducting scientific research herself, but in writing about it. Thus began her career as a medical writer, where she took on all manner of writing and editing tasks, in the process honing her writing skills, until she finally plucked up the courage to write her first historical novel, Under the Emerald Sky. The book is the first in the Irish Fortune series, which is set in 19th century Ireland around the time of the Great Famine. Juliane is inspired by Diana Gabaldon, author of the Outlander series of books, who also happens to be a scientist turned novelist. Juliane lives with her husband and 2 sons in Hamelin, Germany, the town made famous by the story of the Pied Piper. Juliane, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi DK, thanks for having me on your show today.
Oh, you're so welcome. And to get this started, we would love to know, what literary pilgrimages have you gone on?
I haven't done any literary pilgrimages as such, but I did spend most of my life living in South Africa, and I've also traveled quite a bit elsewhere in the world, including around Africa, and I think that certainly helped me in my writing, particularly as far as the setting of my series is concerned. The Irish Fortune series is set in 19th century Ireland, which was a place of extreme contrasts, with people who were wallowing in luxury compared to those who had practically nothing. And having traveled quite a bit and seen how other people live, I think that certainly helped me in portraying those sorts of differences, and I hope a realistic and sensitive way. So certainly having those experiences has been very useful, although not a literary pilgrimage as such.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And to live in South Africa and to be able to travel there, I'm sure that was extremely amazing. I'm going to go ahead and get this question out of the way. Is there a particular book that has made you cry? Can you think of one?
I can't remember the first book that ever made me cry, but it is something that happens relatively frequently. So there are certainly books that have made me cry, and there are books that I've read many times and they still make me cry. So I'm just quite an emotional person, so it's not anything unusual for me to cry while reading a good book.
Oh, I understand that. I can totally relate. Well, since you're an established author now, let me ask you, what do you think are some of the common traps for aspiring writers?
Common traps for aspiring writers. I think there are quite a few, but what comes to mind is writers who try to write what they think people want to read. I don't think that really works. I think you need to find what you want to write, what you feel inspired to write, and write that, and then see what happens after that. I think trying to write something because you think it's going to be the next bestseller or because it's currently in vogue, I don't think that really works, because you're not really going to have your heart in it, and probably you're not going to really be able to write a very good book if it's not really what you want to write. So I think, first of all, write what you want to write, and then worry about all the other stuff.
Right. That kind of goes right into my next question. Do you think that you try to be more original, or do you deliver to the readers what they want? I mean, you kind of already answered it, but what else do you think about that?
I don't really do either. I neither try to be particularly original, nor do I write specifically what I think people are going to want to read. I just write what I'm inspired to write. The stories just sort of develop in my head, and one idea leads to the next, and it all just sort of goes from there, and that's what I write. And so far it's working pretty well for me, and so far my writing has been quite well received, and so I'm sure I'll just continue with that same approach.
Very good. We really are glad of that. So you said earlier that you are a really emotional person. Do you think someone could be a writer if they don't feel emotions very strongly?
I think someone who doesn't feel emotions as strongly can still be a good writer. I just don't know how well such a person would be able to write a novel. I think a lot of people read novels as entertainment and because they want to feel some sort of emotional connection with the characters. Right. And for me, that's certainly the case. I really want to engage with the characters, and for me, that is certainly part of the process to have those emotions come across on the page. So I think it would be quite difficult for somebody who doesn't feel emotions very strongly to portray that in their writing. But of course, the writing as such might still be quite good.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree. Let me ask you this. What other authors are you friends with, and how do you think they've helped you become a better writer?
I've met quite a few authors on social media since publishing Under the Emerald Sky, and it's been really great to find out that a lot of authors are very happy to chat with you and answer any questions you might have if they've been in the industry for a long time and you as a newbie are trying to find your way. And I've certainly learned a whole lot about writing and publishing and everything to do with it that I didn't know at the beginning of this journey, and that I will certainly use in future books in the Irish Fortune series and going forward from here. And so it's been a really great experience, actually.
Yes, I think the writing community, especially the ones that I've gotten to know, are very helpful, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do is continue that on. So we really appreciate that. Well, let me ask you this. If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what do you think that would be?
Interesting question. I think I might tell my younger self, you know what, you can actually write a novel. Surprise, surprise. I didn't actually know this when I started writing Under the Emerald Sky, because up until that point I was actually, although I was a writer, I was not a writer of fiction. I was actually a medical writer for several years, and I studied science, and so I had been doing a whole lot of writing before I ever wrote a novel. But when I actually sat down to write my first book, I didn't know if I could actually do it. I didn't know if I had the imagination and just the general know how to go about writing a book. And it turns out that I can actually invent stories and characters and so on and so forth. And so I think I would just assure my younger self that it is possible and to keep going.
Right. Definitely keep going. So now that you've published your first book, do you think it's changed your process of writing at all?
Publishing my first novel, Under the Emerald Sky, did come with a whole lot of marketing and all sorts of other stuff that I'd never really thought about before, which does take up a bit of time, obviously. And so as far as changing the process of my writing is concerned, I think it's just made me have to be a little bit more particular about when I write and when I do the marketing, and really just compartmentalizing my day in such a way that I can actually get everything done that I need to get done, and then also still have time to sit down and just write without having to think about anything else. So I think that's the main thing that's changed as far as that process is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. You have to be very organized sometimes. I'm learning that each and every day. As a writer, what do you think is the best money you've ever spent? And I'm sure this will help younger writers to know what kind of how they need to spend their money. What do you think?
The best money ever spent as a writer, I think I would have to go with generally money spent on traveling. I think with friends, with family, when you travel somewhere, you just have a whole lot of great experiences that you can always look back on in the future. And I think that is always money well spent, whether as a writer or not. And so, yeah, I would go with that.
Yes, I love to travel. I can't wait till we can get back to traveling again after all of this COVID. But I absolutely agree with you. So my next question I absolutely love. I would love to know what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
I think I learned that quite early on when I moved from Germany, where I was born, to South Africa, where I ended up spending most of my life. I was 4 years old when I moved there, and I couldn't speak a word of English, and so I couldn't really communicate with the other children, and I had to just watch and try to understand what they were saying and to learn over time how to communicate. And I think already from that early age it was clear that not everybody speaks the same language, and there are differences in what people are speaking and how you understand each other. And then also later on there were different groups of people I would speak different languages with, and so that's it's really been something that's been prevalent throughout my life, actually.
That's really, really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let me ask you this about your book. What do you think you owe the real people upon whom you base your characters?
I think as writers of historical fiction, we have a responsibility to historical characters, but also to historical settings and events to provide a well-rounded portrayal of those characters, events, and settings, because very often history is told only from the one side or only the one perspective, and anything that is perhaps a little bit uncomfortable or not a popular opinion is often ignored. And I think it's important for historical fiction writers to really, for us to do our research and to really provide a well-rounded portrayal of all of those historical details, and to not just write what's pretty and what's acceptable, but
Right.
to really write things from different angles and to be as true to what things might really have been like, or to what characters really might have been like, by portraying them in a well-rounded fashion.
Yes, I think we do have a responsibility as historical novelists to do that. Well, let me ask you this. What do you think literary success looks like to you?
Literary success to me is when a reader tells me after reading my book that they couldn't put it down, and that they really couldn't stop thinking about the characters when they finished reading, and that they really just engaged with the storyline and the characters, and that the story really pulled them in. For me, that's literary success. Then I know that as a writer I've done a good job of telling an entertaining story and really keeping the reader captivated. That to me is literary success.
Yeah, I remember saying this in an interview I did, that even if it's just one person who says that, I feel like that's success, because to me it's not about the volume, it's about connecting with one person who felt the way you did whenever you were writing the novel. So I absolutely agree with that. Well, what kind of research do you do whenever you're doing a book, and how long do you usually spend researching before beginning a book?
So far I've mostly done online research because I'm sitting in Germany writing a book about Ireland, so anything else is a bit more of a challenge. But I certainly don't just Google things and leave it at that. I really look at reputable sites and university sites and research articles that have been published about the time that I'm writing about, and I've also made contact with some experts in the field that I'm writing about. And so I really try to base my research on expert opinions and published peer-reviewed articles, and not just Dr. Google. And as far as how long I spend researching before writing, I don't really do that. When I first started writing the Irish Fortune series, I did spend a bit of time just getting to grips with 19th century Ireland, to just get an overall picture of what I was looking at, what I was dealing with. But after that, I really just researched as I needed. So whatever scene I'm writing, if I need to know some historical detail, then I will just look that up. Or if conversely, in my research, I read about something interesting, an interesting event or whatever else, then maybe I'll write a scene around something that I've read. And so it's not necessarily that I do the research first and then the writing, or the other way around. I really just do it concurrently as I need to do the research. And I found that works better than trying to research everything and anything, because otherwise it can also be quite overwhelming. So I really try to just do it in little chunks as necessary, and I find that works quite well for me.
That's a really good system. I kind of do the same thing, so I really understand that. Well, what do you think are the ethics about writing about historical figures? You talked about our responsibility as historical fiction authors. What do you think are the ethics?
I think this goes back to the earlier question, and the ethics of writing about real historical figures, I think, is the same as writing about real historical events. One has to provide a well-rounded viewpoint, and to not just express the pretty and popular opinion, but to really look at all sides and all angles, and to portray things in as real and lifelike a way as possible. And I think that will then hopefully do justice to real life figures and events as they happened, and hopefully also provide an interesting story to the reader, as well as interesting historical information that they might not have known before.
Right. Well, talking about literary success, let's go back to that question. Oftentimes, book reviews give us an idea of our literary success. Do you read your book reviews? And how do you deal with the bad ones or the good ones?
Yes, I do read all my reviews, and great ones are obviously great and make me feel fantastic and think, oh, how wonderful, I've done a good job and somebody enjoyed my book. And when there are negative comments, I must admit it does take me a little bit of time to get over it, but eventually I do. And then I try to just take what I can out of those comments and to really use that information that reader has given me to try and make the next book better, or to improve on whatever it is that they didn't like about the book. And so I try my best to really take a positive out of a negative comment, a negative review, and to really work on my writing and get better as I go.
Very good advice for not just you, but for all of us who are writers. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your book, and what do you think was the hardest scene for you to write in the book?
The hardest scene I've had to write so far is a scene in the second book of the Irish Fortune series, which I'm working on now. And it's a very emotional scene, and I had to really try to keep a distance from the scene and not to get myself too emotionally involved in it, because it would have been quite difficult for me to write it. So as I said, quite emotional, and I had to keep a distance, otherwise I think I might not have been able to write it.
I think we've all been there. We've definitely all been there. Well, as an artist, as a writer, what do you think is the most difficult part of your artistic process?
At the moment, the most difficult part about the artistic process for me is really just finding the time to write. With family commitments and everything else going on in life, I've really had to sit down for specific hours to write and to really dedicate a particular time to my writing. Otherwise, I find that I just don't really get to do it. And that's something that I've had to learn to really do, to treat it as I would any other job, to really say these hours I write and these hours I do something else, to really try to compartmentalize things in order for me to get any writing done at all.
Isn't that incredible? How I love that you said to treat this as a business, because a lot of times I think people think, oh, you're a writer. I don't know, it's not viewed in the same way, but we do have to do that. We have to kind of bring our minds back around to that this is a business. It is a career, and although it's fun, writing is fun, but we do have to treat it like that, and trying to find the time is very much a challenge whenever you're trying to run it as a business. So I totally understand what you're saying there. Well, what about your family? Does your family support your career as a writer, and how have they supported you?
Yes, I'm very lucky. My family is very supportive. My husband's been supportive from the beginning, and he's my number one fan. And my parents have both read the book and enjoyed it, and my mother's bought more copies than anybody else alive and has given it away to various people. And my sister's also been great. She actually designed my book cover, and my brother-in-law has given me all sorts of useful tips about marketing on social media, and various other family members and friends have also been very, very supportive, and it's really been quite a great experience to be so well received. And the only thing is that my German family members keep asking me when I'm going to come up with a German edition of my book, so that's in the pipelines. But otherwise, it's been really fantastic to have that family support when venturing into this unknown world of publishing a book. So it's been really great.
That's great. Isn't it awesome to have that kind of support from your family? It's just gives you a really huge boost. I'm glad that you have that. Well, now I'm going to leave the floor open for you, and we would love to hear more about your book and why you chose this topic. So the floor is yours.
My debut novel is called Under the Emerald Sky, which is the first in the Irish Fortune series of books. And it's set in 19th century Ireland around the time of the Great Famine. And there's obviously the historical setting of Ireland with its huge contrasts at the time, and to give the reader understanding of how the situation in Ireland developed in such a way that this potato famine that hit in the 19th century was as disastrous as it was. But of course, that's not all that's in the book. There's also a bit of romance between Quinn, who's an Englishman who's come to Ireland, and Alana, who's an Irish woman. living in Ireland who happens to have a brother who doesn't like the English at all. So that creates a bit of drama, of course, and so we have a bit of adventure, a bit of intrigue, and I think there's a bit for everyone in the book, really. As for why I chose the setting, well, that was really quite an accident. I had actually been thinking about writing a book for many years before I actually sat down to write one. And it was around the time that we moved from South Africa, where I'd lived most of my life, back to Germany, where I was born, that I suddenly started fixating on this idea of writing a novel. I think it was really a way of just dealing with the stress of it all, because obviously relocating to another country is always a stressful thing. And in my case, it was particularly stressful because I also moved with 2 young children and a husband who had to spend most of his time away from home at that time for work. And so there I was sitting, and I just could think of nothing but writing this novel of mine. And I had kept waiting for inspiration to come, what to write about, and it just never did. And so eventually I turned to Google and just looked at interesting times in history. And that's where I came across the Irish potato famine, and I immediately found this topic very interesting because I liked the idea of the 19th century. I liked the idea of Ireland with its beautiful green scenery and its myths and legends, and everything to do with Ireland I think is very interesting to me. And so there were various things about the setting that really quite appealed to me. And so that's how I kind of accidentally ended up writing a series about this topic. And initially I spent a bit of time researching the potato famine and 19th century Ireland, and first I had to wrap my head around all the historical details and the political and social and various other factors that contributed to this famine and to the disaster that it was. And once I had a bit of an understanding of what I was doing and where I was going, I really just got stuck in and found that I really quite enjoyed the writing. And I realized quite early on that the one book that I was planning on writing was actually going to be more than one book, and so that's why Under the Emerald Sky is not just one book, and it is in fact the first in a series of books. And that's how the topic chose me, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure after the listeners have heard your explanation and told us a little bit about your book, we're all anxious to go out and get a copy now. Well, we really appreciate you sharing that. Well, we're at the end of the interview, and I always love to ask this question because it's very unique. It makes all of us get to know an author in a different way. What is your favorite quote to leave us with? Something that tells us a bit about you.
You know, I'm actually really terrible at quotes. I will read a quote and I will think, oh, this is brilliant, and I'll try to remember it, and I just don't. So I'm afraid I really don't have a favorite quote, and I can't really give you one. So,
well, that's okay. That's completely okay. Juliane, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being on the show today. We are so thrilled to know more about your book, Under the Emerald Sky. And to all of my listeners, please, you can go to www.thehistoricalfictioncompany.com or www.thehistoricalfictionpress.com/bookshop. I'm trying to get these new links in my head. And you can find Juliane's book in the historical fiction aisle in the bookshop. And as always, you can always find it on Amazon. But we would love for you to come to the new website and visit our bookshop and peruse our aisles. Our whole entire website is dedicated to historical fiction, and Juliane's book is among some of the ones that we are offering on the website. Thank you to all my listeners for being patient and waiting on these episodes to go live, and we really appreciate your support. This is DK Marley, the Hist Fic Chickie, and see you next time.